Tomorrow is December 23rd, a date that lives in infamy for those who know the history but is completely forgotten by the masses. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. But tonight is the eve of the crime. Let's go back to Washington, D.C., December 22nd, 1913. The city was emptying out. Congressmen were packing their bags. Senators were boarding trains. It was 2 days before Christmas. Everyone wanted to get home to their families. They were thinking about turkey, gifts, and fireplaces. They were not thinking about monetary policy. And that was exactly the point. You have to understand the setup. Whether you believe it was scripted or not, the sequence was perfect for the people who wanted a central bank. 6 years earlier, in 1907, there was a massive financial panic, the Panic of 1907. The stock market crashed, banks failed, people lined up to get their money out, and the windows closed. It was chaos. And who stepped in to save the day? J.P. Morgan. The legendary banker locked the leading financiers in his library in New York and forced them to bail out the system. He acted as a one-man central bank. The newspapers hailed him as a hero. Morgan saves the nation. But here's what the textbooks don't emphasize. The men who benefited most from that panic were the same men who would benefit most from a central bank. The financial elite, Morgan, Rockefeller, Warburg, and their networks used the Panic of 1907 to terrify the American public. They said, "Look, the banking system is unstable. We need a solution. We need a central bank to prevent this from ever happening again." It's the oldest trick in power politics. Problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem or let it happen. Manufacture the reaction. Offer the solution you wanted all along. But the American people hated central banks. They remembered the warnings of Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. Jackson had killed the second bank of the United States. He famously said to the bankers, "You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out." The public knew that a central bank meant handing over the sovereignty of the nation to unelected private bankers. So the men who wanted a central bank had to disguise it. They couldn't call it a central bank. That sounded too European, too monarchist. They called it the Federal Reserve System. Federal, to make it look like it was part of the government. It is about as Federal Express. Reserve, to make it sound like they had money in the vault. They don't hold reserves the way you think. What they really have is a legal monopoly on the printer. System, to make it sound decentralized, with regional banks in Kansas City and St. Louis, so the farmers wouldn't think it was run by Wall Street. De jure, it's a system. De facto, Wall Street holds the steering wheel. They spent years funding academic papers, placing allies in key positions, and building political support. And finally, in December 1913, they were ready. But they knew it wouldn't pass a full vote with everyone present. Too many skeptics would read the bill and see the implications. So they waited for the snow. They waited for the holiday. They waited until the opposition had left town for Christmas. On the night of December 22nd, the moment arrived. The bill was rushed to the floor. The debate was cut short. The exhausted, distracted, and thinned-out Congress was pressured into voting for a document that few of them had read and none of them fully understood. Congressman Charles Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous pilot, stood up and shouted, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money trust investigation will be legalized." Nobody listened. They just wanted to go home for Christmas. The textbooks will tell you the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the banking system. That's the polite version. The impolite version is this. The night of December 22nd, 1913 was the last night America operated under the old monetary order. Before the Fed, the dollar was anchored to gold. Over more than 100 years, prices were remarkably stable by modern standards. A dollar earned by your grandfather bought roughly the same amount of bread for your grandson. After the Fed, the dollar has lost over 97% of its purchasing power. Before the Fed, the government had to tax you to spend money. If the people didn't want a war, they didn't pay the tax, and the war didn't happen. After the Fed, the government could print the money. They didn't need your consent. They could fund endless wars, endless bureaucracy, and endless debt, and send the bill to the future. This wasn't a law passed to protect the economy. It was a transfer of power. The power to create money, the most consequential power in any civilization, moved from the people to a network of private banks with a government wrapper. Tonight, as you sit in your home in 2025, realize that the inflation destroying your savings, the debt crushing your children, and the dysfunction in Washington, it all traces back to this specific moment. The night the watchdogs were home for Christmas. The night the wolves walked into the henhouse unopposed. By the time anyone woke up, the deed was signed. Tomorrow, we will talk about how they wrote the plan, the secret meeting on the island, the creature itself. But tonight, remember the greatest transfers of power are not announced with trumpets. They happen in half-empty chambers just before the holidays, while the public is busy wrapping gifts. Tonight, you learn how the trap was built. Tomorrow, you learn how to step outside of it. I am the architect, and I will see you tomorrow.